Hope on the Hard Road podcast, where you and your family can find community, find encouragement, and find hope for the road ahead.
Don't quit before the miracle happens. If you knew it was going to work, you wouldn't bat an eyelash at it, right? So that's why I'm here to say, just don't quit before the miracle happens, because if you're plateaued or you gave up on spelling before, you need a different set of eyes on your child, right? You need a different perspective from another professional who can help guide you through. Because I know if they've learned to do anything, including sit in a chair when you ask them to sit in a chair or buckle their seatbelt, they can learn to do this, right? You just can't compare your journey to someone else's journey, like your path to fluency to someone else's path to fluency, because, they're not the same. Each child's not the same, but the connection's possible. And of course, your child, we all know this, your child's worth every ounce of fight you're going to put into getting them to that place.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast today. We're so excited you're here. Today we have Dawnmarie Gaivin, co-founder of Spellers Method and executive director of the Spellers Freedom Foundation. A former trauma and transplant nurse who spent more than a decade working in prestigious teaching hospitals in both Boston and San Francisco. When she became a mother in 2003, her life took an unexpected turn. By 2006, both of her children had been diagnosed with nonspeaking autism.
Driven by an unwavering commitment to help her boys find their voices, Dawnmarie transformed her career. She became an assistive technology specialist and a DIR Floortime provider, ultimately founding Spellers Center San Diego in 2017 and co-founding the revolutionary Spellers Method.
Featured in the Spellers documentary, her impact has rippled far beyond her own family. Let's listen in as she shares her story.
Well, hi, Dawnmarie. We are so excited for you to be on our podcast. We have a couple mutual friends. We've been exposed to this spelling, and this is in our spelling series, and it's super exciting for you to be able to come on here and share so much with us. So welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much.
We are just really excited for this topic to get out to the families and those that are already in the spelling community to see it highlighted. And so, Dawnmarie, your work has touched so many families, and we would love to know your background, who you are, what you do. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Okay. So when I was a little girl, the two things I knew I wanted to do was be a mom someday, and I wanted to teach special education. But by the time I was graduating high school, I noticed, because I'm very pragmatic, I noticed there was an overflow of teachers and a shortage of nurses. And I happened to get a scholarship to a school that didn't have an undergrad education program. So I became a nurse. And luckily, I fell in love with nursing, and it has served me very well to have that as my background. So I'm an RN. I worked for about 11 years in major teaching hospitals, and then had my two boys. They're just 16 months apart. I did not plan that. It happened pretty quickly, number two. And when Trey, my youngest, was only 4 months old, his brother Evan regressed and was diagnosed with autism. And then literally a year to the day later, so was Trey. He had regressed and developed autism. So both had been speaking and hitting their milestones, and then started losing the skills. And so I think for those of us who've had that autism sort of entry, there creates a feeling of something happened, this happened to them, what happened? And now I've got this urgency to figure it out and fix it, right? Not that there's anything wrong with being neurodivergent, or, I definitely didn't think at the time they were born that way. So I was struggling to get their speech back, some type of communication. And really that started driving me, and getting them healthy, by the way, because they both have significant GI issues as a result of their autism too. So getting them healthy, getting them eating a better diet and all those things, turning over every stone I could to get reliable communication, or any communication. Evan, to this day, he's 22 now, and he is a non-speaker. And by that, we usually mean people with like less than 20 words or approximations. He really can only make a certain number of sounds that he pairs with gestures. And so we figure out that ba with a finger is mom, ba with a cup is Starbucks, we got the gist down, right? So in the car, that's our flyby communication system. But he's a fluent speller. And I discovered actually a rapid prompting method back in the maybe 2012 or so, but he wasn't healthy enough yet. He was really sick at the time with his gut stuff. And once he was well, I started teaching him RPM. And then learned S2C because I met the founder of that, Elizabeth Vossler, at a conference, in a very small conference. And the rest is history. I just kept stalking people who had what I wanted for my children. And so I appreciate the perseverant parent who's like, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm like, no, like that's how you get it done, right? You've got to ask these questions and turn over those stones just so I could really, my bar was low. I just wanted my children to be able to protest something that they didn't want and like advocate for something they did. I truly had no idea that they were both completely intellectually intact inside those bodies and that nothing had changed their cognition when I saw that regression happen. In fact, they kept absorbing information, but I didn't know that. So I was pleasantly surprised that through looking into all these forms of communication, I still get to have the joy that I looked forward to as a little girl. I wanted to parent. I wanted to be a mom. I wanted to watch my children flourish and turn into whoever they were meant to be. And then I thought that was taken away from me. And now it's sort of been given back through communication.
Oh, wow. Boy, I absolutely identify with that. Our own daughter, Abby, was diagnosed right before she turned 4. And so same kind of grief journey in not expecting it. And then we've dealt a lot with the GI issues. I think it's pretty common, right?
Common, very common. I think the statistics like 76% or something of folks with an autism diagnosis. Yeah, it's definitely connected.
Well,
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and we sure appreciate your advocacy. We understand as parents, it's like you got to get in there and figure out as much as you can. And you don't want to say the term fix it, but you're trying to figure out what are the next steps. And as you went along this, there's these kids and it's kind of like they're trapped in there. But at some point, I think you had a turning point. Can you describe that when you realized what's actually inside these kids and started to figure out how to bring it out of them?
Yeah. I as a nurse and as a nerd, I'm really a bona fide geek who likes to read white papers and take data. I remember bringing data sheets to the gastroenterologist. He said, no parent has ever done this for me. I'm like, well, I can predict what the pathology is going to say based on the behavior. He's like, oh my gosh, you need a job. So anyway, I'm like, this is my job. I knew I would take so much just observational data of things that I noticed a trend with Evan in particular. And he has more apraxia. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, later in the podcast of what is apraxia and whatnot. But he is more apraxic than his brother. His brother did regain a little bit of speech. He's what we call a minimal speaker, Trey. But Evan, I would say one day, hey, Evan, get your shoes. He's 5 years old or 6. Go get your shoes and put them in the basket by the door. And some days he'd go pick up his shoes and he'd toddle over and he'd put them in the basket. Other days he'd go halfway across the room. He'd turn back. He'd look at me. He'd pick up a dog bone. He'd look at whatever. And then he'd be so confused. And I remember thinking to myself objectively, well, was yesterday the fluke or is today the fluke? So if someone told me, and they did, that he had a expressive language disorder and a receptive language delay, and that he had a intellectual disability, that he had an IQ of 50, they would tell me all these things. And I was like, well, I don't know how that's possible, because some days he operates like any other kid his age, just without speech. But apraxia is consistently inconsistent. So I had already noticed those things. And then the day that I hosted one of the leading RPM providers, I hosted like a clinic for her with 13 families in San Diego. I sat in on everybody's session because I, again, was dissecting the method. I'm like, what is she doing? How does it work? I had read all the books. And when it was my son's turn, she asked him, she was doing a poem about the sunlight came through the trees and it warmed the boy's skin like God's love. Evan, what's another word for God's love? And he's 11, right? And I turned to my friend who's sitting there and she's like, what's another word for God's love? I'm like, I don't know, dude. It's on me. And my 11-year-old son spelled benevolent.
Whoa.
I actually then was like, this is snake oil. It was too much of a paradigm shift for me that I was like, okay, Evan, why don't you go play in the gym? And I had him like leave the room and I started drilling her to be like, did you like, there's no way. There's no way an 11-year-old kid knows the word benevolent as a synonym for God's love above everything else. So anyway, we did end up having this whole conversation around, she's like, well, what do you do? And like, where might he have heard it? And like, what do you talk about at home? What do you watch on TV? Somebody had done Reiki on Evan when he was having a GI flare, and it worked. It helped him. And I was willing to do anything that would help my son when he was in pain. And Reiki was founded by a Buddhist, Mikao Usui, and it talks all about these principles of Buddhism and benevolence. And I did notice that when my teacher would come to my house, because he would come to me because of my kids, Evan would sit under the table, literally quiet as a church mouse, and sit in on all the training that I got. So I was like, yeah, he did have exposure, but I didn't think he was listening, right? I was like, he's stimming on some object and whatever. And they have such great brains for absorbing information because they're never practicing what they're going to say next. They're just taking it in. So it's there for the grasping once we teach them a reliable motoric way to communicate it, whether it's speech, whether it's a device, whether it's a letterboard, whatever it is. Once they have a way to get it out, then you know what's in there, right? So that was kind of my benevolence was my turning point. And now I call God like the benevolent universe. I'm like, it really encompasses everything I believe at this point, that the world's conspiring in your favor if you choose to look at it that way.
Oh my goodness. Seriously, that's incredible. Absolutely incredible. You know, I don't know if you can remember kind of some of your early experiences working with those that are non-speakers and any stories that might kind of come to mind about that early experience with doing this amazing way of communicating.
I feel like from the beginning, I've felt just so humbled to have this as my role, as my job, or as what the universe has asked me to do with the rest of my life. Like, it's such a privilege because these individuals, they certainly have their challenges, right? Whether it's sensory processing differences that make the world very assaultive to their system, whether it's the community just being ableist and making it difficult for them to be fully included, whatever it is, right? Life is not easy for them. And yet they really are the most beautiful souls. And I have some parents who get nervous when their kids getting on the boards. They're like, oh gosh, when they get open, they're going to tell me off. They're going to tell me about all those things I said in front of them that I shouldn't have said. And parents are so nervous. I'm not kidding. In 10 years, only one person ever was mad at their parent. And it really wasn't even about any of that. Like it was like, I'm like, they're so gracious that I just remember being almost starstruck. Like I would meet fluent spellers and I was starstruck to be like, wow, like you are some of the most resilient people I have ever met. And so when I think life is challenging today or the world has put too much on my plate, more than I can handle, and I look at the grace, honestly, that they have, and then the resiliency they've put into learning to point to letters, which seems so simple, but it is not. Like they're really my heroes. And I'm not saying that to be like, to whatever. I don't know what the word is, to sensationalize it or whatever. They're just amazing. So I love it. And I think they know that. So when I meet a new speller for the first time, I think we vibe right away because I genuinely am like, I cannot wait to know you. I feel like I know something about you, but I can't wait to know the nuance of you. It's like such a privileged job that I get to do.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Definitely. To figure out what's actually on the inside, just an amazing thing, kind of put that puzzle together. I think people that aren't familiar with spelling probably think it's a simple thing. You're just tapping a letter on the board and, what's so hard about that possibly, right? So, but maybe you can walk through it because certainly you've mentioned this apraxia, but for those who don't know it, like what is all entailed in that challenge?
Yeah.
And how does spelling unlock their ability to communicate where it wasn't previous?
Yeah, I think it's worth starting by mentioning that apraxia is, in layman's terms, this brain-body disconnect. And if your loved one or child, even adult child, there's no age limit to when someone can start this. I know my partner in Florida has a 57-year-old woman who's spelling, and her parents are in their 80s and for the first time are having conversations. Like, it gives me chills, right? Like, they have waited their whole life for this. If your child is not using speech to fully communicate, right? Meaning they're minimal speaking. It's easy when you say they're non-speaking. Okay, we're going to try spelling. They're minimal speaking. Okay, we're going to try spelling, right? Why not? Maybe it'll help. If they're unreliably speaking and scripting, but using a ton of speech and language, then you're like, well, how would spelling help? Well, how it helps is it bypasses from the brain to the body. And I mean by that from the brain to the articulators. So your lips, your tongue, your jaw, your breathing mechanisms, how you take in air, when I take a breath between making sounds, my tongue moving around, right? All this very organized, fine motor, fine muscle movements, right? Very complicated. When the signal goes from my language centers in the brain, like, oh, I want to answer this question by saying X, Y, or Z, the signal has to travel to some part of my body. So usually if speech, I'm going to start talking and saying those words I thought. If I can't do that reliably or robustly, then I want to figure out a way to communicate by bypassing this, right? So gross motor, which is bigger muscles like your shoulder moving and pointing, that's easier for your brain than to move these little tiny, very complicated articulators. So we're never going to, all the studies show this, by the way, when you use any form of assistive technology or augmentative communication, you do not stifle speech. So you will not stifle a person's ability to speak. They won't stop speaking. They might stop unreliably speaking because they get more control over those things that automatically pop out of their mouth, right? Like they've practiced this script. And so it pops out even when they don't mean to. When I hand my son Trey something, I'll say, what do you say? He goes, thank you, you're welcome. He always says, thank you, you're welcome, right? It's like, he can't stop at thank you. And that's well myelinated. And that's what he says every single time. And by myelinated, I mean like those neural pathways are like grooves in a road. They're well treaded, right? So basically that's what spelling is doing is we're saying, okay, you've got the thoughts and ideas. We're not going to try to force them to come out through speech. We're going to keep even everything that from letterboard placement where we don't center it in the middle of a body, we center it in front of the dominant spelling hand. So the person doesn't ever have to cross midline to hit the corners of the board. That's lowering the motor demand, right? We put it down low. People think it should be high for their eyes, but believe it or not, it's harder to lift your eyes up than to do it where you would normally read a book. So the board is down lower and in front of that hand. Every little standard of practice in spelling, which is why it is a little more complicated than just throwing a board down, is designed to make it as easy as possible on the brain so that those signals can come out clearer. And then once the motor skill is mastered, like once you learn to ride the bike, then you learn to ride the bike in traffic. And then you learn to ride the bike in a triathlon. Like you start getting increasingly more difficult in what you ask the person to do with the bike, which is like, okay, remember what I just taught you in this lesson on Ben Franklin, which is how we start. We practice with these lessons about a topic that I've picked that's age appropriate. And we do this back and forth to eventually using these boards for communication or to go to college or to take classes, which is what my son Evan is doing. He's taking music tech classes at the local community college. He took a business math class, which stumped everybody communication partnering for him. He knows the answers. They're like struggling to keep up and going for tutoring. That's what it can do for you. It gives you access and agency to do these things with the rest of your life.
Eric sitting here as a math teacher.
That is so cool.
Your teaching approach has become incredibly influential. How would you describe the heart or the philosophy behind your method? And what makes it different than some of the other approaches that might be out there?
My partner who I developed Spellers Method with is Dr. Dana Johnson, and she's an occupational therapist. Ironically, Dana does not have children. However, I have never met a provider who gets it like a parent would get it. Is I do think that parents who are practitioners or providers have a slight advantage of having the lived experience and knowing exactly what it's like. Dana can hold a total candle to these people, right? Like it's unbelievable. She did her dissertation on like the parent experience in raising a child with autism. And we both come from a DIR Floortime background, which is very relationship driven, accommodating for the individual differences and parent focused. So a holistic see the family as an ecosystem kind of model. And that is truly what differentiates our method from others, because we use a lot of the same tools. Like you'll see stencils and laminate boards and keyboards that connect to iPads for voice output. You'll see all that. One of the other methods like ours also follows a certain hierarchy so that there is a replicable sort of methodology to it versus kind of like see what you get and try the different boards in different orders. So there's some overlap, but really the driving difference is we presume competence, which means I believe in people's ability to learn and desire to learn, whether it's the speller or the parent. We presume competence in the parents. We're like, this is a parent-driven method. Like if we are not working ourselves out of a job with every single family, then we're not doing our job. And our training course right now, we have 40 people it's our first big launch. We've done cohorts of like 8 or 10 because we wanted to make sure our experiential training decks were like on point. Now we've got 40 people doing it all at one time, and they're blown away. Like, this is so much work, but like, it's so cool to watch it all come together and synthesize the way we envisioned it, and to create that, like everyone comes in with compassion. That's why they're interested in doing the work. But to really embody, well, what does that look like? How do you treat these families? You cannot have parents on the sideline while you're spelling with their kid. That's not doing anybody any favors, right? Then your child actually can be dysregulated waiting for their appointment on Wednesdays at 3 to talk about this thing that happened on Monday, right? Like, I want you guys to be able to communicate with your child every day at the emergency room, at their own IEP, or at whatever. And like, that's our goal. And I think that is what differentiates our method from others.
I just absolutely love that. I'm a teacher, so knowing the relationship aspect period of it is just fantastic. And, I have deaf kids in class, so I've seen this idea, and I'm talking to them actually about spelling, not that they're the same, I know that, but this idea of bringing language where the rest of the people in the room may not have the same language, and just being able to see that unlock. I'm curious, is spelling happening in actually the classroom as well?
It's a great question. And we have a few obstacles, which is actually one of the main reasons that I just took officially the executive director job at Spellers Freedom Foundation, to pivot some of my work more to that national platform. Dana and I piloted with Communication for All. So that's, you probably know of Elizabeth Bonker and her mom, Ginny Breen, and she was the valedictorian. The speech went viral. So we worked with them in a Chicago school district. It was like a SELPA of 11 different districts to bring spelling into schools with the most on-board administration you have ever met. And we still learned how many obstacles there are for that to happen. And they're not at that local level, actually. It's bigger than that. It's federal. It's the ASHA statement from the Speech and Hearing Association that says that these methods have all been debunked and that they're influencing the children. If I were influencing my own child, I mean, literally, why would I ever have started this in the first place? I don't want to hear my voice on a letterboard with my son, right? So, and that's why I think parent providers get a little bit of street credibility, because I'm like, why would we do that? Like, what would be in it for us? Like, we could just keep going on our merry way and not practice hours and hours and hours and hours, like, to hear my own voice. So the school stuff, yes, on like individual levels. My son got it through a lot of advocacy and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears initially. His letterboard into his IEP with all the accommodations he needed, a one-to-one communication partner. And I've told people moving to San Diego, I'm like, move to this district, because they will not teach it to your child, right? Because they don't have to do that yet, but they will accommodate it if the child is already a fluent speller. And so that's happening everywhere, I think, when you've got strong advocacy, but it needs to be obviously much more integrated for all the kids who don't have the means to pay privately or whatnot to learn to get trained.
Yeah.
That's wonderful, because as a teacher and working also with special ed kids, in addition to math, advocating on behalf of people to get the most out of their education is dear to our hearts, and working with it. Talk to us, because you just mentioned how pivotal the parent role is in this. What would you be telling parents, as they start this journey? And we know from friends' journey that this takes a while sometimes. It's a long road before you unlock the door, basically. Take us through that process.
I think that don't we all get a little tired when someone goes, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Like, enjoy the journey, not just the destination. I get that. And my other favorite one is God doesn't give you more than you could handle. God didn't give this to me in the first place. Like, this is just what's happening, right? Like, no one's punishing me or whatever it might be. It is really important to enjoy the process, right? Because you don't know how long is it going to take to go from what we call acquisition, which is when you're skill building, to application, which is when now this letterboard is a functional means of communication for your child. And you can't bypass the process, right? Like, you can't just throw down a 26 letterboard and start asking questions. If you do, you will actually end up influencing their answers without knowing it, because you don't know what influence is unless you're getting trained. You will inadvertently influence them unless you follow the sort of hierarchy or plan of attack, if you will. So enjoying the journey and enjoying the process of engaging with your child in age-appropriate curriculum. Not that all of us wanted to be homeschoolers, but it feels a little bit like doing some homeschooling. I tell parents, what did you imagine you would teach your son or daughter? Like, are you into photography? Then you use AI and you write a bunch of lessons on photography and you start teaching your child about your interest. Because what kid doesn't want to learn about their mom or dad's favorite thing, right? Like I did when I was a kid. It is about the journey, right? The destination is the cherry on top. The communication is like, is the not the best part. It's what you know you're going for, what they need to, but it doesn't change the fact that they have autism, that they have apraxia, that they often have whole body apraxia, that they might have sensory processing issues. Like, that stuff doesn't go away, but it makes everything easier in the sense that they can now tell you like what is going on. There's been 2 times my son has gotten into a funny loop of sorts. And I've told this one before, he's given me permission, but he would touch right before COVID, he would like occasionally notice someone in the grocery store and then go up and like touch their pants, but kind of near the top of their thigh, which is a little bit of a no-no zone, right? And he would startle them. And a couple times these dudes turned around and were about to pop him one, and it scared him. And so we would spell, like I had a behaviorist as part of his school team because they were being just, homeschooled. And she said, Evan, what if we made you like a little fabric ring of fabrics that you could touch instead on a ring? And he's spelling, and I'm just being the communication partner, and he spells, that's stupid. And the mom in me is like, that is totally inappropriate, right? Like I would never, I'm like, Evan, and I try not to wear both hats, right? I'm like, I'm just being the CP here, but I'm like, Evan, he's like, I'm sorry. He's like, but that's not it. He's like, and she's like, okay, well, what's going on? And she took it so gracefully. She's like, okay, cool. It's stupid. What would work? He's like, well, it's that the person and their energy and the fabric they're wearing creates like this aura. And he didn't use the word aura. I don't remember what he said, but he goes, and I just got to touch it to experience it. And then I'm good. And it's true. He literally would just touch them one time. So then we're like, oh, so what do we do about that, Evan? Like, and so he had to help us brainstorm. And he goes, I think I should just sit on the ground when I get that impulse until they leave or it goes away, because then everyone will stay safe. And I'm like, okay. So we spent a lot of time sitting on the floor at the local grocery store, but I'll tell you what, he solved the problem. And I wouldn't have known how to do that, right? So the problems still come up, but like it's such a game changer when you have the GI issues to say, can you describe it? Like what does that feel like? It is information that makes the journey on the hard road, it makes it less hard, right? To have some of that information.
To have that insight. Wow, that's incredible. It really is. I mean, they are using so many other brain pathways that we will only find out, in these amazing moments. It's so
Totally.
So you've seen so many spellers come alive through this communication modality. Is there a particular story that just inspires you just personally? And it might be your son, it might be someone else you've worked with.
The story I think of is a young man who actually not only sort of came alive, but stayed alive thanks to, he got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer after he became a fluent speller, and literally was able to spell with his doctors to guide his chemotherapy treatments, because they base it on symptoms. Like he has to report if his toes were feeling numb, if whatever, like he would have to give feedback to the doctor so they would know what to do as far as the medication and dosing. His name's Cade Larson. We actually did an episode. We did sort of a spinoff from the Spellers documentary called Underestimated TV. And there's a whole episode about him and rock climbing after the journey, which is with one lung removed and all these things. Pretty inspirational. He wants to be the first non-speaking U.S. senator. So that's his mission, actually, is to be down there in DC. And I think he'll do it. I mean, it's pretty awesome.
That's amazing.
Well, that story of the 80-year-old parents that are finally hearing from their kid,
Yeah.
that is just absolutely amazing, which never give up, right? Never
give up
on the situation. Those stories are just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Bravo. We are rooting him on. Incredible.
Definitely. Now, you already mentioned Dana a little bit, and you also, I think you've talked to us about what drove you to write that, to, be able to get that book out and to help other people.
Well, J.B. Hanley and his son, Jameson, they actually wrote a book called Underestimated, which started this whole sort of revolution. So if you haven't read that, it's a tearjerker, but it's amazing. So Underestimated was published, and his book publisher, Skyhorse Publishing, asked JB to write a speller's guidebook. And he said, I'm not going to write that. He's like, but I know two people who should write it. And so he introduced, so it wasn't even our initial idea. It was actually the publisher's idea, who has a daughter who's a speller, by the way. So out in New York City. And so Dana and I literally, it like fell off our tongue. Like we wrote that book in no time at all. We wanted it to be conversational. Like if you were having coffee with us and had a million questions to ask us about it, what would we tell you? It's a great book to hand a school district teacher or another parent or somebody starting, because by the way, I believe firmly that this should not be something you go broke trying to do with your child, like learning to do with your child. You don't have to, because it's parent driven. There's a little bit of an investment, whether it's taking an online communication partner course and buying this book and a set of boards. But really, you can get by with just a couple check-ins at pivotal points with a provider. You don't have to see a provider weekly. I mean, sometimes there's state funding for that, which is amazing through, the regional center or whatever state you live in. The point is, the book was meant to be a great adjunct for those of us who really want to understand the why behind what we're doing, because it can feel tedious and like, well, what does it matter if I do this? Well, who cares if I spell this way or I let that go or whatever? And we really laid it out to go, okay, here's why you want to nip that in the bud, right? Like if a speller starts grabbing the letterboard from you because they're hyperlexic and they love spelling and they take it and they start practicing spell words, I'm like, we don't let that happen, because that board, you got to protect it to be the most reliable form of communication they're going to have. I have, when someone really wants that, I'm not going to get into a tug of war either, but I'll give them their own board that looks totally different. I'm like, that's your board. You do whatever you want on that, but the one we communicate with is my board and it's over here, right? So things like that are in the guidebook to go, well, what if this and what if that and how does it all work? So I think it's a nice overview, and then they recorded it. Apparently it's an audiobook too. So it's another good car ride, listen to, and it's good for your kid to hear it. Like they want to know, how is this working? Why am I working so hard on this? Is this another therapy that's not going to lead to something, right? So I think it's good for the speller, but it's really good to answer those questions. But there's also other places now too. There's the Spellers community on Facebook. It's really run by parents. We're just there to make sure nobody comes in and throws a grenade or something, but it's really just parents guiding other parents through the process with their own experience and hope that they want to share. But this is like the technical guidebook to it.
Love that. So good. As you look ahead, what are your hopes for the spelling community? How do you see your work helping create a more inclusive future for non-speaking individuals?
Yeah. I mean, right now, my hope is that one day people don't have to fight so hard to prove that non-speakers are equal, right? And that they deserve to be heard and to have access to everything that every other human being has access to. That's my hope, right? Right now, we're still battling paradigms that are like decades old. Even when sign language was first introduced, it was debunked. Like everyone thought it was fake. It wasn't really them communicating. So I do think things take time. I think we're getting near a tipping point, and that was sort of our idea behind Spellers Revolution and with the documentary and all the other things that have come out since, to say, really, to change the system, we probably need to empower a whole thousands of non-speakers and their families, because we will create that systemic change, right? And through Spellers Freedom Foundation, right now, what we're mostly been focused on has been giving scholarships to people who need like financial support to get access to training. Again, just to build that army of non-speakers, because even if you're just making a change for your neighbor's child or in your local community, that's how it happens. This ripple effect is how it happens. It doesn't have to be always down in or up at the Capitol in Sacramento or in DC. Eventually, we got to get there too, but we need all these people behind us. And then back down to the microcosm of like, my son deserves to have a letterboard at his college, or in his high school or in his 5th grade classroom. And it's getting progressively easier. And I don't know if that's because he's aging and like people accept it more now that he's older, or time has passed, or it's just the difference between, high school and college. I want it to be easier for everyone. I want our children to be valued for who they are, because I know without them needing to change, even those who are not spelling and who may never spell are in there, just like all the spellers that have gotten access to communication through Spellers Method or other methodologies. And I want equality for them too.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. Yeah. Going from having just a few outliers to having an entire population, statistically, it speaks the evidence of what's actually happening, what's actually in there with the individuals and how much intelligence is there. And yeah, hopefully that whole thing does create an entire paradigm shift and we start believing.
Yeah, we see it.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting. It's exciting.
One of the things we always like to do and ask our listeners is, what is one thing you'd like to leave with our listeners that would bring hope for the road ahead?
If I give one piece of advice, is that don't quit before the miracle happens. And it is a different road for people, right? Like some people do start this journey with letterboards and their child is spelling openly in 6 to 7 months. The average of, and I say average, is like 18 to 24 months. Some kids take 4 to 5 years, but in an 80-year lifespan, spending 4 to 5 years on something to gain access to reliable communication, as long as like if you knew it was going to work, you wouldn't bat an eyelash at it, right? So that's why I'm here to say, just don't quit before the miracle happens, because if you're plateaued or you gave up on spelling before, you need a different set of eyes on your child, right? You need a different perspective from another professional who can help guide you through. Because I know if they've learned to do anything, including sit in a chair when you ask them to sit in a chair or buckle their seatbelt, they can learn to do that. You just can't compare your journey to someone else's journey, like your path to fluency to someone else's path to fluency, because they're not the same. Each child's not the same, but the connection's possible. And of course, your child, we all know this, your child's worth every ounce of fight you're going to put into getting them to that place.
So Dawnmarie, how can our listeners get a hold of you if they are interested in the spelling method?
They can definitely go to our website, which is spellers.com. My email is just my first name, dawnmarie@spellers.com. You are welcome to send me a note. The courses, all the resources we offer to help train families are online. You can see that there. But also the nonprofit, there's so much good stuff on the spellersfreedomfoundation.org website. If you're brand new, I actually suggest you go there first and there's pages on how to start, where to get more information. At the end of the day, it's not really about which path you take up the mountain, right? If you do Spellers Method with your child, if you do RPM, if you do S2C or facilitated communication, the point is actually that you get started and you find someone that you can work well with and take feedback from as they coach you. And that's all that really matters, right? We're all in this for the same mission, which is to give voices to our children.
Dawnmarie, this has been amazing, really incredible. And we are so thankful for your insight, your personal story, and all that you're doing for this community. It's incredible. So thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Check out the show notes to find resources and contact information for today's episode.
Yeah, and if you like the podcast, please share it with others and be sure to follow us so you won't miss an episode.
We love to hear from our listeners, so leave us a comment or rating and connect with us on social media or on our website at hopeonthehardroad.org.